morning, church. First, we give honor to God, and I thank God for the shepherd of this congregation, our pastor, Howard John Wesley, who has afforded me this opportunity. I want to invite you this morning to open your Bibles to the Gospel of Luke. We'll be reading from the 24th chapter, and today, because it's Easter Sunday, we're going to go old school and read from the King James Version. Luke 24, 1 to 8, and when you have found it, please stand to reverence God's holy word. Now, upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. And they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre, and they entered in and found not the body of Jesus. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed down their faces to the earth, they said to them, why seek ye the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he spake unto you while he was yet in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, but on the third day rise again. And they remembered his words. Church, I want to speak with you this morning on the topic identity verification. Identity verification. I am a wife and a mother who works outside of the home, in addition to working inside the home. Let's be clear, working mothers work in and out of the home. And in the year 2015, I want you to know how much I enjoy the technology that is afforded to us in the year 2015. I can transfer money on my smartphone. I can pay a bill by pressing send. I can be in church, and if pastor mentions a book, I can press 2 buttons on Amazon, and it will be to my house in 2 days, free shipping. I like what you can do with modern technology. It works really well until you have a problem. Because then you have to call that 800 number, and you call and you press all the buttons, and they say something like, thank you for calling. We appreciate your call. Please pay attention to the menu as our options have changed. So, you know how this goes. So you listen and you wait and you press the right button. You have to focus, because if you get distracted, you're going to miss your prompt. And then after you press the right button, they will say something like, to better assist you, please give us your account number. You type that in, don't get it wrong, because then you got to go back to the beginning. Then they'll ask for your PIN. Put that in, press pound. Then, when you get to the next level, you're almost to the third heaven, they will ask you for the last 4 digits of your social security number or your password. And then, if you are lucky enough to get a live person, they may ask you those same questions all over again, right? So I'm good till the person asks me the questions I already answered 5 minutes ago, but they will tell you that they are going through a series of questions to protect you, to protect and verify your identity. We want to make sure it's you, Mrs. Williams, is what they tell me when I am exasperated. And I want you to think about those questions as we look at our text today, because the women in our scripture lesson today are about to be in a situation where they need to verify someone's identity. You see, the women in this text are making their way to Jesus' tomb, and they have a task at hand. There are certain things that have to be done to a corpse. The women were going to take care of it. They knew how to handle it. They were going to take care of Jesus in chapter 24, just like they had been taking care of Jesus since chapter 8. You see, the Gospel of Luke says, way back in chapter 8, when Jesus was out in the countryside of Galilee, certain women followed him. It tells us that they ministered to him, and the root there is the root for deacon. They took care of him. They provided for his needs, and wait, it gets better, out of their own money. These were some working mothers. They knew how to work inside the home, they knew how to cook a meal, and they had a little cash. They followed Jesus from chapter 8 to the end. They followed him all around Galilee. Now, I don't know what happens later on in that chapter. I don't know where the sisters were when Jesus walked on the water, because you know we don't like to get our hair wet. I don't know where they were. But they followed Jesus. They followed him through Capernaum. They heard his teachings. They witnessed his miracles. They followed him all the way to Jerusalem. They were there when he was betrayed. Some of them witnessed his arrest. They were there at the trial, and yes, they were there when he was crucified. They followed him, and just like that, he was gone. But these sisters continue to follow him in death, just as they had in life. The end of 23 says they figured out who was going to bury Jesus. They got to Joseph, and they followed Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph took the body down. Those sisters were right behind him. It says they went to the place where he lay the body. And then it says they saw how they laid him, which is code word for they told Joseph what to do, right? They didn't see how they laid. They said, Joseph, that's not right. Do it this way. And after his body was laid, they went home for the Sabbath. Our text says that they waited until the Sabbath was over, and then very early, before dawn, on Sunday, they did what they had been doing for Jesus since chapter 8. They served him. They went and took the spices they had prepared, and they get there, and somebody had flipped the script. They get there, and the narrator tells us the story from the perspective of the women, because it tells us that the stone was gone, and so was Jesus. The stone is gone, and Jesus is gone, and suddenly, out of nowhere, come these two men in dazzling attire. Now, we have the women's perspective, two men, but we know who those two men were. They were angels. And this is what's interesting about this story to me, because the job of an angel, by definition, is to bring a message. An angel's supposed to show up and tell you what God wants you to know. Angel comes to Mary, says, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord has favor on you. He gives her a message. God sends an angel to Samson's mother. You're barren now, but God's going to bless you with a child. We expect these men to give a message. But these brothers got jokes. Why seek you the living among the dead? They offer a rhetorical question. Now, a rhetorical question is a question you ask that doesn't really require an answer. You don't ask a rhetorical question for the answer. You ask it for the effect. Are you going to forgive him? Do pigs fly? Sisters, some of you will ask someone you're dating, do you love me? And he'll say, well, do fish swim? Look out for that if he can't just say yes. In 1851, Sojourner Truth went to a women's convention as a woman of color and had to remind them of who she was by asking the rhetorical question, ain't I a woman? A rhetorical question doesn't need an answer. It sends a message. It's a teaching moment. And I love this because I'm a teacher. So here you have women looking for Jesus at the tomb because that's where they left him. They followed Joseph there. They saw how he was laid out. And scientifically speaking, their behavior is right. Their behavior reflects an understanding that is supported by physics, namely that inanimate objects do not move by themselves. They require some outside force to get from point A to point B. And so we see that the rhetorical question is redirecting these women to tell them the problem is not in their understanding of an inanimate object. The flaw is in the analysis of the subject. You forgot who Jesus was. Now, let's give him a little bit of credit because of the trauma of witnessing Jesus' death. Any trauma can cause you to go into what we call autopilot. It's cognitive dissonance. We saw who he was. We saw what he did. How did this happen? Cognitive dissonance, they're in autopilot. The reality of death means they need to take care of the body. And so that's what they do. And in all of the activity of taking care of Jesus' body, they forget what he said. Until they come to this place and these two brothers show up and ask the rhetorical question that doesn't want an answer, but wants to make an impression, that wants to reorient them. Here they are at an empty tomb, and they are being asked to make a decision about who Jesus is. They are being asked to verify his identity. And at this moment, we want to ask ourselves, what is it that question tells us? I think we've got at least three things that we can take from the question and the words that follow. Why seek ye the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Sisters and brothers, the first thing we want to remember about the resurrection is the resurrection is real. Now, the women were following Jesus, and they knew that Jesus was real. They were following him because they believed in what he was saying and what he was doing, but they also knew that death was real. Jesus was real, and death was real. And they did not fully comprehend that Jesus was fully God and fully human. Now, perhaps if they would have understood this, they would have behaved differently. But I want to tell you, saints, the incarnation is a tricky thing. We say that Jesus was fully God and fully human. How does that work exactly? Sometimes they saw Jesus do things like heal the sick, or bring Lazarus from the dead, or walk on water. Well, that kind of is fully God. But then they would see him weep over the death of his friend, or on the cross when he said, I thirst, and then he was dead. That looks like human to me. The rhetorical question that the angels ask invite us into a deeper understanding of the mystery of the incarnation. Jesus is not God on Tuesday and human on Thursday. He is fully God and fully human all the time. And because of that, we have access to both aspects of Jesus all the time. Jesus, you know why we love Jesus? We love Jesus because Jesus is fully attentive to our human frailty, but has all power in his hand. He was fully dead, and then he was really risen. He was fully dead. And this is important because sometimes people are going to try to tell you that Jesus didn't really die. There are people who are going to tell you that he passed out from the pain. And then he was in the tomb and he was able to recover and he got up. Some people will tell you he was in a coma. And the reason they say this is because they cannot fully comprehend the mystery of the incarnation. How can you be fully human and fully God? Others will tell you that Jesus did in fact die, but he didn't rise. That The story of the resurrection is a symbolic story to inspire us to hope in the face of difficult times. That it's something that we reflect on so that we can feel better. We can think about this great teacher who, even though he died, his memory lives, his teachings, his policies live on, and that lives on in us. I stand here before you today to say we affirm as a people of God that he really did die. He really was dead. No breath, no heartbeat, no blood running through his veins. He was cold. He was dead. He was dead, but then he rose. Now, I want you to understand why this matters. We are a people who know death. We know about people who are killed, who are innocent. We know about young men who have to be buried by the women who walk behind before it is their time. We know about taking people down who have been hung up, whose bodies are desecrated, and we want to restore some semblance of dignity. We know about death. And that's why it matters that Jesus really rose. We need a God who has the power to bring life out of death. We need a God who knows how to take something that has no hope and give us a new beginning. We need a God who creates order out of chaos. The resurrection is real because we know a God who knows how to change reality. Dead people don't move until they do. Until they do. I want to affirm this morning that the resurrection is not only real, the resurrection is ridiculous. Can we just get that out and say the resurrection is ridiculous? This rhetorical question that the men ask the women points to the flaw in their logic. They are seeking after Jesus. They are doing what they've been doing before. They are following after Jesus. There is nothing wrong with following after Jesus unless you're in the wrong place. Hear me, church. There's nothing wrong with serving God unless you are serving God the way you've been serving God for the last 47 years because you think that's the only place where God can abide. You think God can only work in the way you do it. You think God can only work through the people you choose. You think that it's all about you and all about what you know about God. Here's the good news. What Jesus does when he comes back to life doesn't follow the rules of physics. But the good news is we serve a God who doesn't follow the rules. God never did follow the rules. Think about it. God calls an old man with a wife who's never had a child to say, you're going to be the leader or father of a great nation. God calls a man who's got a speech impediment to go before the great Pharaoh and speak for God. God calls a woman, the wife of a man hanging out in a tent named Jael, to take down the great military leader, Sisera. God calls these women who have been following in the background to be the first witnesses to the resurrection. God doesn't follow the rules. Remember what he said to you. The Son of Man. When Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, it's almost like his personal pronoun. He is trying to tell you who he is. I am a man under the full authority and invested with the full power of God. And as soon as God comes into the equation, the situation changes. Knowing who God is changes things. Now, some of you have had the experience of knowing somebody important or knowing somebody, let's say, who's a manager or owner of a restaurant. When you walk up to that restaurant and you drop their name, things start happening. You get the nice table. You get the extra special treatment. You get things that aren't even on the menu. You all know that it's nice to know somebody on the inside. And truth be told, some of y'all are in here right now who didn't stand in line because you knew somebody on the inside. I'm just saying. You said the right name and your status changed. Your association with the right person opened doors for you. And the resurrection is ridiculous because we know that just because Jesus lives, just because he lives, my entire world gets to change. It's very simple, but it is, in fact, ridiculous. The final thing that I want to share with you all is that the resurrection is intended to be repeated. Now, we commemorate the resurrection every Easter. We come, we put on our fancy clothes, and we sing He is Risen. And y'all know there's certain songs we have to sing and certain things we have to do. And we think of the resurrection as an event that needs to be commemorated. But I want to suggest to you this morning, church, that the resurrection is supposed to be a way of life. The resurrection is something we want to embody, not something we just think up here, but something that is in our body memory. Remember what he said to you when he was in Galilee. Remember. I want you this morning to think about remember as the opposite of dismember. The trauma of the crucifixion left the disciples and the women who followed in pieces. And the angel says, listen to these words, remember who he is, and put yourself back together. The difference between cognitive memory and body memory is knowing what to do in the clutch. Now, let me give you an example. Years ago, I had my first job. I was out of college. I had a paycheck. I had a place to live, and it was time for me to buy a car. And I was living in New Hampshire, and the people who I worked with said, if you live in New Hampshire, you need to get a manual transmission because you'll want to be able to handle the roads. It'll give you more control. I said, sure, fine, let's do it. And so I was a good driver. I had never driven manual, and they said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll walk you through it. So I called one of my colleagues, and his name was Werner Brandeis, and he had this Saab. He took me in the Saab. He showed me what to do. He talked me through it. He explained there was a clutch and a brake and a gas pedal. So instead of 2, you got 3. And there's this timing thing you have to do, right? You got to lean up off of one and get into the other. And then you got to remember about moving the stick. So you got, all right, did you get it? All right, so we have a couple lessons. I get this car. I drove it home. Sat in my parking lot for a couple days, and I had to go out. I went out, and I'm doing it, and I'm driving, and then I got to an intersection, and it was just like very slight incline, just a very slight. You could barely tell, but when I came up off the brake, the car started to roll backwards, so then I kind of overcompensated, and the car went just far enough to get me halfway into the intersection. I tried again. And after about 3 unsuccessful attempts, I was smack dab in the middle of an intersection, blocking traffic in all directions. And I couldn't remember a single word that man said to me about driving that car. I hated the car. I got the car home. I looked at it every day for a week. I just looked at it. I walked around it, just kind of gave it a look. I didn't like the car. I didn't want the car. And finally, I thought, you're going to have to learn how to do this thing. And you're going to have to learn how to do it so you don't have to think about it. So I got to a parking lot, and I sat there, and I rehearsed it again and again and again until I was shifting gears in my sleep. Saints, some of us need to practice the resurrection until you know in your body that God is alive, that Jesus rose from the dead. Some of us need to practice a rhetorical question to get in our spirits. So this Easter day, we celebrate, but tomorrow some of us are going to walk in places of death. Some of us are going to be confronted by a crisis that makes us feel like we are broken apart. And I want you to practice the resurrection. Ask yourself, is the Lord risen? Does my God really reign? Is he the Alpha and the Omega? Did he set the stars in place? Did he send his son Jesus? And did Jesus die? Is he still dead? Am I more than a conqueror? All I have to do is verify the identity of God and practice the resurrection in my life. Why seek ye the living among the dead? He ain't here. He gone. He is risen.